In front of me right here, I have all 13 pieces of the jacket cut out. Now you can see here, this is the A Girl for All Time version, front and back view. So you can see how all these pieces fit together to make this denim jacket design. There are a lot of intricate little pieces, but once they're all put together, it really comes together nicely for an authentic jacket design. So let's take a look at the pieces. We have the side front, center front, inside front, front yoke, pocket flap, the collar, the cuff, the back yoke, center back, side back, waistband, back tab, and the sleeve. Now we can take a look at the pieces that make up the front of the jacket. Again, this is the 3 pieces across the bottom, the inside front, center front, side front, pocket flap, and then that front yoke. So you can see those pieces there. And then we have on the back yoke, center back, and side back. The center back is on a fold and the back yoke is also cut on a fold. Then for the side back, we have 2 pieces. So you can see these all next to each other and how those will connect together to make the back of the jacket. So again, we have center back, side backs, back yoke. Then we have the sleeve and the cuff and the collar. To begin, we are going to sew the collar piece and the 2 pocket flaps. We have the pieces in front of us and they were cut 2 for the collar, so those are wrong sides together, and then we have the 2 pocket flaps separated. So here you can see we have them ready to sew. They're right side up and the 2 pocket flaps are also right side up. So I'm just going to put those right sides together. And then we are going to sew down the side to the bottom point, up around to the other side, all with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then for the collar, we will put these right sides together, and from the neckline edge, matching center back, we will start at the side, sew up the side, across the top, and down the other side. You can choose to use pins or to just hold the pieces together. It's personal preference. Now we're over at the machine. I'm just going to show you quickly. I have this marked on the stitching line at the corner turning points or the pivoting points of where I'm going to do my stitching. I've marked that with a colored pencil so that I can clearly see where I'm going to pivot my stitch line. And I'm going to do this all in one continuous stitching motion with a back stitch at the beginning and the end. I'm going to mark the same points on the collar on the 2 corners so that I turn at exactly the same space so I have even collar points on both ends of my collar piece. Alright, so we have all those seams sewn. Now we are just going to clip corners and grade the seam allowances a little bit. So to clip the corners, we just cut close on the diagonal, close to that point, but don't cut through the stitching. And then to grade the seam, you're just going to cut one of them down pretty close to the stitching, and then the second one on the seam allowance just a little bit longer. So it will have a gradual decrease down into the collar instead of a big lump when you go to turn that right side out and do your top stitching. So then you'll just repeat that on these little pocket flaps as well. Come in and trim down as close as you can and grade these seam allowances, or just trim them as close as you can. Then you're going to go ahead and just turn the pieces right side out. You can use a point turner if you have one to shape the corners, but these are pretty easy to turn right side out. And then carefully, if you push too hard, you may push your fabric right through your stitching. So again, you just carefully push out your corners on both sides and on the pocket flaps. And then we'll go ahead and press them, and then we will begin the top stitching. We'll use the edge stitch foot and we will go around the perimeter edge of both the collar and both pocket flaps. And there you can see that finished stitching. Now, one of the great things about the denim jacket is that it looks even better when you do distressing. So if your corners are a little bit uneven and it looks like you have a little bit too much fabric beyond your stitching line, this is a great place, a natural place to add distressing, and then that will help hide that a little bit of imbalance between the stitching on the sides and the stitching at the point. But the more you practice this and are working on the same pieces, you'll get familiar with your foot and you'll be able to pivot and turn at exactly the right place if you don't want to have distressing. There you can see the pocket flap. This one looks pretty good, and again we can lightly sand out these corners just to give it a more authentic look, but the stitching here is really nice and even, and this upper portion is going to be tucked into the seam allowance. So we have those all top stitched, then we're just going to set these aside to work on the next section. So we're going to bring in the pieces that make up the back. We have the center back, the two side backs, and the back yoke. So we have these laid out, they're all right sides up. First we are going to take the two side backs and sew them to the center back. So we are going to put right sides together, sew a straight seam, 1/4 inch seam allowance down this side, press this open with the seam allowance towards center back, and then we will top stitch or edge stitch along that seam line, and then repeat that for the opposite side. Now we have the yoke and the lower back portion sitting right sides up, and we are going to attach these right sides together. You'll line up the seam. We're going to straight stitch across this seam line, and then we will press the seam allowance up towards the yoke. Then we will go ahead and top stitch, edge stitch 2 rows of stitching along this seam line. Here we have the front pieces for the jacket. This is the wearer's right side. We have the upper yoke, the side front, center front, and inside front, and then one of the completed pockets from earlier. So we have them all sitting right sides up. You'll notice we have a straight line at center front and 2 diagonal lines that meet this center portion. So make sure that you have those sitting properly and you are using the right pieces for the same side of the jacket. Now we're going to take these 3 bottom pieces, and with right sides together we are going to sew them to the center portion. So we will place the inside front on top of center front, straight stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we will take the side front, right sides together, place that on top of the center front, stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to zigzag and finish all these seams, then they will be pressed in to center front as well. Then I'm going to take a single stitch and come down on top of this exterior top stitching line and come and angle into a point where I have my pin. It's different on each size of the pattern, so you want to check your pattern piece to see the exact placement of that stitching line that is going to sit below the pocket flap. So you'll have your pocket flap, and then right below it you'll just have a stitching line for the base of a pocket that's not really there. It's just the exterior stitching line. Then we're going to set this little pocket flap in place. You can either use some quilter's tape underneath to hold it, or you can just baste it down. And then you're going to take the top yoke with right sides together, line up that seam, and then you will straight stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance straight across that seam line, zigzag the edge, and then press that seam allowance up towards the upper yoke. Now we're going to bring the back and the jacket fronts together, and we are going to sew the shoulder seams and attach the collar. So to do that, we have the shoulder seams lined up. We are simply going to match them up right sides together and straight stitch 1/4 inch seam allowances for both shoulder seams. The seam allowances will get pressed towards the back, and then we will run 2 rows of top stitching 1/8 of an inch apart on both shoulder seams on the right side of the fabric.